If you've been told that social media is an essential tool for staying connected or informed in the modern world, I have a rather blunt medical diagnosis for your ego. You are currently acting as a non-paid crash test dummy in a high-tech lab, run by teenagers in Silicon Valley. We've been conditioned to believe that unplugging is a luxury for the rich or a retreat for the weak. But in the world of neuropsychology, staying constantly plugged in is actually a form of voluntary cognitive sabotage. If you don't solve your relationship with that glowing glass rectangle, you aren't just losing 10 minutes here and there to cat videos. You are losing the compounding interest of your own genius. You are trading your high-fidelity, M-shaped potential for a blurred, low-resolution existence where your brain's operating system is being rewritten by a social media algorithm. Welcome to Cognitive Blueprint. Today, I'm not going to give you another cliché digital detox lecture. Instead, I'm going to tell you the story of how I, your resident mind decoder and the self-confessed informatio and junkie, quit social media for 30 days. We are going to bypass the surface-level talk of productivity tips and look at the actual physics of your gray matter. I'm going to decode what happens when you remove the digital parasite, moving the conversation from willpower to the cold hard science of neurochemical restoration. The reason most of you have failed to quit in the past isn't because you lack grit or discipline. It's because you are fighting a chemical war with a psychological toothpick. For the deep-thinking introvert who uses digital spaces as a sanctuary from the friction of the real world, or the scanner brain who justifies their scrolling as research for their 14 different hobby paths, the algorithm is a masterpiece of biological manipulation. Every time you just check a notification, your amygdala, the brain's ancient smoke detector, sounds a silent alarm. It doesn't sense entertainment. It senses a high-stakes social safety check. Here's the paradox of the scanner brain. The more you scroll to find inspiration for your projects, the less creative you actually become. You think you're collecting data points for your far transfer breakthroughs, but neurologically, you are just filling your working memory RAM with digital exhaust. By 10 a.m., your prefrontal cortex, the expensive, high-maintenance CEO of your brain, is already out of gas. You feel wired but tired, because your brain is currently running a 2024 social operating system on hardware that views low signal as a life-threatening exile from the tribe. You have been blaming your character for your lack of focus, when you should have been blaming your chemistry. To understand what happened during my 30 days of silence, we have to look inside the black box of your reward system. Think of your brain like a high-end computer. Your RAM is limited, and most of it is currently being occupied by attention residue, the tiny ghost of every TikTok, reel, and tweet you've seen in the last 48 hours. When I quit, the first thing I noticed wasn't peace. It was a violent surge of cognitive entropy, neurologically. My brain was in a state of dopamine downregulation. 4 years, I had been blasting my system with the high-fructose corn syrup of cheap dopamine, unearned, erratic spikes of validation. When I cut the cord, my boredom threshold didn't just move. It collapsed. My ventral striatum, the brain's reward center, was like a person screaming in a quiet room because the music had suddenly stopped. This is the aha moment. Your addiction isn't to the content. It's to the intermittent reinforcement loop. You aren't a user of an app. You are a pigeon in a Skinner box, pecking at a glass screen for a random pellet of attention. During the first 48 hours, I experienced what researchers call the Extinction Burst. This is the biological trap where a habit gets most intense right before it dies. I felt itchy. I felt irritable. I felt like I was missing out on the evolutionary leopard lurking in the digital grass. But as a mind decoder, I knew that this discomfort was simply the sound of my neural receptors upregulating. My brain was literally building more antennae to catch smaller, quieter signals. It was the sound of my IQ returning to its rightful owner, for the multitasker and the polymath. This phase is the most dangerous. Your brain will try to convince you that you need the feed to stay relevant in your wicked career environment. But the truth is, the specialists of the 20th century were built for a world that stayed the same. The M-shaped professional of the 21st century, the one who survives, and thrives needs the cognitive surplus that only comes when you stop paying the digital tax. By day 7, my CEO finally came back to the office, and for the first time in a decade, the boardroom of my mind was actually quiet enough to hear the music in the data. By the second week of my digital silence, the itching in my fingers finally stopped, and something truly strange began to happen. My brain, which had spent years acting like a jittery manual gearbox with no oil, suddenly found its overdrive gear. I noticed that my internal monologue, which used to sound like a chaotic Slack channel, had transformed into a singular, high-definition stream of thought. This is what neuropsychologists call transient hypofrontality, the biological state of flow. We discussed in day 12, but it wasn't just a fleeting moment. It was becoming my baseline, without the digital residue of 300 strangers' opinions clogging my RAM. I could hold a complex coding problem or a narrative arc in my head for hours, without the system crashing. I wasn't just more productive. I was reclaiming the gray matter density that the algorithm had been harvesting for profit. This was the moment I realized that my IQ hadn't actually dropped over the years. It had just been buried under a mountain of digital exhaust. But I didn't want this to be just a lucky accident, so I developed what I now call the Cognitive Decoupling Sequence. This isn't a habit. It's a high-performance operating manual for the M-shaped professional who wants to live in the real world without being consumed by the digital one. The first stage of the sequence is the analog anchor. Every morning, for the first 90 minutes, I engaged in a high-friction, generative task writing by hand, sketching, or solving a logic puzzle before a single electron from a screen was allowed to touch my retina. This prevents the amygdala hijack that happens when you check your email at 7 a.m. and spend the rest of the day in a reactive crouch. By the third week, this sequence allowed me to perform far transfer breakthroughs that had eluded me for years. I finally saw how the structure of a medieval cathedral I had been researching related to a database architecture problem at my day job. The bridge between my worlds was finally opened because the noise had been silenced. However, I have to warn you about the hidden obstacle. On exactly day 14, I hit what I call the relapse ghost. This is the moment where the novelty of the experiment wears off and the Sunday scaries of existential boredom kick in. My brain began to hallucinate notifications. I felt my thigh vibrate even when my phone was in another room. This is the biological extinction burst at its most violent. Most people quit here because they confuse this biological withdrawal with a need to be connected for their career. But as a mind decoder, I knew this was just my basal ganglia begging for a cheap pellet of attention. To bypass this, I used tactile grounding, carrying a heavy physical object, like a stone or a specialized pen, to remind my nervous system that I was anchored to the physical world, not the digital void. Once you push through the itch of day 14, you reach the state of cognitive ease, where the real work no longer feels like a war against your own biology. By day 30, the transformation was total. I had moved from being a distracted scanner who knew a little about everything and finished nothing to becoming an attention architect. My prefrontal cortex was finally back in the CEO's chair, but with a new set of rules. I realized that my 30-day experiment wasn't just a break. It was a biological graduation. I had proven to my neurochemistry that I didn't need the fire hose of cheap dopamine to feel alive. My boredom threshold had recalibrated, making the quiet music of deep work feel as stimulating as a thriller movie. This shift in identity from a user who is managed by an algorithm to a master who manages the system is the ultimate goal of the cognitive blueprint. Imagine your life 30 days from now. You are no longer the person trying to stay off your phone, fighting a daily, exhausting war of willpower. You have become the person who connects the dots that everyone else is too distracted to see. You wake up with a clear RAM, your amygdala is at peace, and your M-shaped career is skyrocketing because you have the cognitive surplus to outthink the specialists. You have stopped acting as a crash test dummy for Silicon Valley and started acting as the architect of your own genius. This is the end of week 2, and you have officially moved from damage control to elite optimization. To help you navigate your own 30-day restoration, I've put together a resource called the Social Media Decoupling Blueprint. It's a minimalist PDF that maps out the analog anchor rituals and the tactile grounding. Tools I use to reclaim my mind, specifically tailored for the deep-thinking introvert. You can download it at the link below. I want you to tell me in the comments if you had an extra 4 hours of elite focus every day. Which of your dozen paths would you master first? Let's map out that bridge together. And if you're ready to see how this reclaimed brain handles the most wicked environments of the future, you need to be here for week 3, the polymath strategy. Reclaim your sovereignty. Build the bridge. You are watching Cognitive Blueprint, and I'll see you in the next one.